Welcome to this tutorial on using the ENG boxes. So the first thing we're going to do is take a look inside the box. You get it out of the closet, you bring it to the table and open it up. Inside the box you're going to have camera, microphone, headphones, microphone cable, a small headphone-like cable, so this connects the Juice Link audio box into the camera, and you might have a back cap for the lens, and then this is a body cap for the camera if you were to take the lens off. The next step would be to walk over to the office, and then we're going to use the scan system to sign out, so you'll need your ID number, and we'll grab this and do some scanning of each of the pieces of equipment. If you need any lenses, they're in here, so you can ask for a specific millimeter focal length, and then we would put the package together. So if you're grabbing T6s batteries, you have to go into this closet, and the batteries are on the charger on the wall. Note that they're fully green, that means they're fully charged, and then you can pull these off and put these over here if they are charged. If they're not charged and they're waiting to be charged, we can set them up on top and then throw them in. We'll see. The light goes on, so yellow means it's charging, and this one should be close to fully charged, so it might go green in a second. And if not, we'll just keep on keeping on. So we did our equipment check and we signed everything out, and now we're going to set up our battery check. See if I can get in focus here. So here's our T6s batteries. Camera can get flipped over. The battery tray is right here. You got to kind of use your thumbnail to pry it up. That gets a lever out of the way. And then I want you to pay attention to the battery terminals and how they sit. So if you look towards the back, or towards the back side of the camera, so you want to put the battery terminals together and slide it in, and then this little latch will fall over, and then you can close it when you need to take the battery out. You push the latch out of the way and the battery can be pulled up. So now you have your battery in camera. The next step would be turning the camera on. So the on switch for this camera is right here. You're going to flip it to not just on, but all the way to video camera mode. And then the next thing you want to do is identify on this wheel that you are in manual. Let me see if I can get better zoom in. Will it focus? Yep. So there's manual, and it has to line up with that white dash on the side there. So you can press this little safety thing in and rotate the wheel. The wheel won't rotate unless you press it in. So make sure that you're on manual and the camera is all set up that way. And then we're looking at the back of the camera here. The best setting for this camera is start thinking about the resolution. And the resolution is, if you hit the Q button, it's a hard button, or on the screen, touch screen, you're going to go over to this section of the menu. Down at the bottom here, it's going to give you a bunch of different selections. We want full HD, FHD, that's going to give you 1920 by 1080, so that's vertical pixels 1080, 1920 horizontal pixels wide, which makes up the mosaic video image. And it's also telling you your frame rate. So I jumped out of that menu. So we have 24 frames per second to look more like film. It's actually a 2398 frames per second. And then there is full HD 2997, that's all the way to the left. Standard, it says at the bottom, and then 2997, that's frames per second. I like to shoot 24 frames per second pretty much all the time because it gives you more cinematic quality. It's a little flickery and it looks like film. So that's what I would check there. And then also while you're in there, you can go Q and get this menu up, and then over to the right is going to be your white balance. You're going to want to lock that off. You don't want to leave it in an auto mode. Currently it's under a fluorescent white balance, but there's a daylight and shade and cloudy and tungsten. White fluorescent is kind of the light we're under most of the time in here. So that's usually a pretty good setting. And then if you want a manual custom white balance, you would have to zoom in and take a picture with the shutter button, which is on the front up here. So this is the shutter button, like if you were shooting photography. So you would zoom in on white and take a picture. I don't really have a white thing here. But for video purposes, usually we do a pretty good job just locking it off on, you know, a specific preset. Because if you have it in an auto mode, they will change while colors change on, I'm sorry, the calibration will change while colors change in front of the lens. So, you know, if it's seeing lots of blue colors, we're at Shawnee, it's going to kind of counteract that bluishness and think we're in daylight, and your image quality is, you know, will change kind of on the fly. So let's lock that off and be in fluorescent. So we just set up our frame rate and resolution and our white balance. So I'm going to back out of there. And then the other settings is all exposure, and we can get pretty heavy into exposure stuff. But it looks like I have an autofocus on the lens. I'm going to turn that off. We usually have autofocuses on the side of the lens here, so you can see it. The stabilizer and the autofocus is up top. So stabilizer on is pretty good, and then the autofocus on versus off. We use manual focus, and you're going to rack this ring for focus. And with this specific lens, this ring will give you zoom. So it's changing the focal length of the lens from, does it say? There you go. So 8, kind of hard to see, 18 millimeters. So there's that line that's telling you what focal length you are. And as you rotate it this way, it goes all the way out to 135. So there's 135. If I kind of rotate out, you'll see I'm at the furthest end of the zoom range. So that's zoom and focus. Get you back in focus there. And then we're going to go here. And I just wanted to talk quickly about our setup at the bottom here. So when you're in the manual mode, and that's what you set up with the wheel, you have control over shutter, f-stop, or aperture. That's the hole that lets the light in. And then your chip gain, or ISO. So we want to try to shoot the lowest ISO setting possible. Now with this lens, shooting 100 ISO under the classroom lights, if we were to go to the fastest, I'm sorry, the most amount of time per frame, which is 1/30. So this is actually, should be a fraction, 1/30, or a 30th of a second per frame. Oops. And then if we open up our iris as far as we can, it's still going to be a little dark. I'm slightly out of focus here, but what we want to try to do is get a little bit more out of our exposure, and you're going to bump up your ISO to make that happen. So I was up at 400, maybe 200. It really depends on what's in front of the camera in terms of, you know, we got a lot of light when we're under this light. Lighting the back of the camera here with some light. So I might be able to get away if somebody's this close to camera. You know, 100 ISO would work, but the stuff in the background is pretty out, so it depends on what your frame is meant to do. So here I'm at 400 ISO. So with this kit lens, 400 ISO, 1/30. Some people like to shoot a little bit higher of a shutter speed, so 1/50 is what, you know, if you go on like nofilmschool.com or other websites that kind of talk camera tech, 1/50 is a recommended lowest shutter speed. It has to do with how each frame is scanned. And then your iris is always going to be as you know, set up in order for your exposure to kind of be what it needs to be. But also, when you start getting into the other lenses that we have available, it's what you're gonna see in terms of what's in focus or depth of field. So there might be a small area along the z-axis, like you can see in this image currently. The foreground here is out of focus, and the background here is out of focus. So we have some shallow depth of field going on where there's only a small area along the z-axis that's in focus. Like right about here we're in, and then right about here we're out. So we're only talking about 3 or 4 inches of where we're getting sharp focus. So depending on your lens setup, you might want to change your right now I have a 5.6 on this camera that we're working with, and this camera is set to 3.5. But if you zoom in, you're going to start to lose some of that depth of field. If I get something in frame that I can get into focus, maybe get this bag. So you see that the bag in the foreground here is in focus and the background is blurry out of focus. That really ramps up in terms of the blurriness, how shallow it gets with the different lenses we have available. So more on that when we get lenses to the camera, but this is kind of the basic setup. You get the camera out, you make sure you get the battery in correctly, you set to manual, you do a Q check and you go through and make sure you're in 1920, 24 and locked off for your white balance. And then we're going to bump out and we're going to just adjust our bottom section here. You have your shutter speed, your f-stop, and your ISO. And really, you set the shutter to 1/50 or 1/30, the most amount of time per frame. And then you're going to be working with your iris pretty much when you're indoors to get your depth of field so you know what's in focus and what's not, because the higher you go with your iris, the darker it's going to get, but you're also going to get this depth of field, and then you can maybe try to correspondingly use your, let's go to 16, use your ISO to bump it up. Now the problem with that is when you bump up your ISO, you're also bumping up noise. So we always want to try to shoot the lowest ISO possible. So I'd say no more than 800 on this camera. 400 is still pretty noisy, but definitely no more than 800. Try to shoot at 100, and you can't really do it with certain settings on this lens. So you'd have to get, the most open iris, and then even still, this image looks a little dark. So you might get a different lens that gives you a wider iris opening. Some of the prime lenses we have do that. So that's going to do it for this tutorial on what you can do with getting the camera just kind of set up for shooting video. We didn't touch on audio yet. That'll be a separate tutorial on its own. And we didn't really touch on kind of lens settings and some of the other theory stuff about framing. That'll also be on its own later on.